Have you ever felt completely invisible? Like you were just going through the motions of life without really living? That's exactly how I felt until everything changed one ordinary summer weekend. My name is Catherine, and I'm 52 years old. For most of my life, I played it safe. I got married when I was 23, raised two wonderful kids, and built what everyone called a perfect life. But here's the secret I never told anyone. I wasn't really happy. I was just comfortable. I had convinced myself that being safe and being happy were the same thing. But I was completely wrong about that. I thought my life would always stay the same. Quiet and predictable, like a clock that just keeps ticking without anything exciting ever happening. I never imagined that one phone call could shake everything up and make me feel truly alive for the first time in years. It all started on a hot afternoon in late May. I had just finished working in my rose garden when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Margaret, my best friend since college. Her mother had fallen and broken her hip, and Margaret needed to fly across the country right away to help her. She had one big problem though. Her son Lucas needed somewhere to stay for a few days, and she was asking if he could stay with me. I remembered Lucas as a tiny, shy boy who would hide behind his mother's legs whenever they visited my house. He barely spoke above a whisper back then, but Margaret had told me he had grown up a lot. He was now 17 years old, almost 18, and much taller than both of us. I agreed immediately because Margaret had helped me through some really tough times in my life. Letting her son stay with me seemed like the least I could do to return the favor. Lucas arrived at my house just as the sun was setting. He carried an old backpack over his shoulder and gave me a surprisingly warm smile that seemed a little shy. He thanked me politely for letting him stay, calling me Mrs. Morrison. I laughed and told him he was too grown up now to be so formal. I asked him to just call me Catherine instead. When he smiled at me again, I noticed something strange. His eyes stayed on my face just a tiny bit longer than normal. I told myself I was imagining things and not to think too much about it. We quickly fell into an easy routine. That first evening, I made lasagna for dinner because Margaret had once mentioned it was his favorite food. Afterward, we sat down to watch a movie together. He picked an action movie filled with car chases and explosions. The kind of film I normally find exhausting and too loud. But instead of watching the screen, I found myself watching him. He leaned forward the entire time with his eyes wide open, completely absorbed in every scene, like he was searching for some deeper meaning in all the chaos. We didn't talk much that first night. We just exchanged simple conversation about his school, his grades, and what he might do after graduation. He wasn't sure yet if he wanted to go to college, or maybe work with his father in the construction business. What surprised me was how thoughtful he seemed. He wasn't the typical teenager glued to his phone and ignoring everyone around him. There was something different about him. Something deeper. Later that evening, I brought him fresh sheets and blankets for his bed. I found him sitting outside on my small patio, staring into the darkness. Lightning bugs were blinking on and off in the tall grass beyond my fence, and crickets were singing their nighttime songs. The air felt thick and peaceful. I stepped outside and asked softly if he was doing okay. He nodded but didn't say anything for several long moments. Then, very quietly, he said something that caught me completely off guard. He said he sometimes wished he could just pause everything and hold a moment perfectly still. He asked if I had ever felt that way. I looked at him carefully, really looked at him for the first time. I noticed the sharp line of his jaw lit up by the moonlight and the serious, honest expression on his face. His question had taken me by surprise. I admitted to him that yes, I felt that way more often than he might think. He turned his head toward me, and I couldn't tell if it was the cool night air or the quiet intimacy of the moment. But something shifted between us. Something unspoken passed through the space separating us, like an invisible thread connecting us together. Then he stood up, gave me another small smile, and said goodnight. I stayed outside under the stars for what felt like hours afterward, trying to understand the unfamiliar warmth that was spreading through my chest. I kept telling myself it wasn't attraction. It was just appreciation. Maybe a reminder of what youth and possibility felt like. Or perhaps just the feeling of being truly seen by another person after so many years of being invisible. The next morning arrived quietly and peacefully. I made French toast and bacon for breakfast, and Lucas surprised me by helping clean out my messy storage room without me even asking him to. We played music while we worked, mostly old folk songs from my college days. He shocked me by recognizing many of the songs and even singing along to several of them. His voice was surprisingly melodic and pleasant. I teased him, saying his music taste was way better than I expected from someone his age. He laughed, and it was such a warm, genuine sound that it made me smile. He explained that his mother had played my old mixtapes for years while he was growing up. She had always told him that I had introduced her to the best music dot by late afternoon. We were both tired and sweating from all the cleaning work. I suggested we cool off in the backyard swimming pool. I hadn't been swimming in several years, but the idea suddenly sounded wonderfully refreshing. I changed into a simple navy blue swimsuit that had been folded away in my dresser drawer for longer than I wanted to admit. I suddenly felt self-conscious about how it fit my middle-aged body. When I stepped outside, Lucas was already floating peacefully in the water with his eyes closed and a calm expression on his face. He looked so relaxed and completely at ease. Something inside me softened when I saw him like that dot without opening his eyes. He called out for me to join him. The water was pleasantly warm from sitting in the afternoon sunshine all day. We splashed around and swam lazily, talking about random, unimportant things. Then he looked directly at me and said something quite suddenly. He said I didn't smile very often. I blinked in surprise. I told him I smiled plenty. He slowly shook his head and said I just went through the motions most of the time. But when I truly smiled, when it was genuine and real, it transformed my entire face. He said it was quite remarkable to see my breath caught in my throat. I tried to laugh it off and dismiss what he said as silly young person talk, but his words stayed with me. The way he said it, the way he seemed to actually see me. Not as Margaret's middle-aged friend or as a divorced woman with a boring, predictable life, but as a real person. As a woman who was worthy of attention and notice. That night after we finished dinner, I found myself unable to sleep. I kept hearing his voice and his laughter echoing in my memory. I kept feeling the way his eyes had held mine just slightly too long. I started to realize that maybe something was waking up inside me. Something I hadn't felt in many, many years. Something that both scared me and excited me at the same time. But I didn't yet understand how deeply it would affect me, or how much it would change everything about my life. The following morning, I woke up before the sun rose. The house was completely silent and wrapped in darkness. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching soft light slowly spread across the lawn. I tried to convince myself that the strange, unsettling feelings from the night before were just tiredness, or maybe just the oddness of having an unexpected guest in my normally quiet house. But when I heard his footsteps coming down the stairs, the sound of bare feet against the hardwood floor, something fluttered unmistakably in my chest. It felt ridiculous. I was 52 years old. He was barely finished with high school. I had absolutely no business feeling what I was feeling. Still, when he appeared in the doorway with messy hair and sleepy eyes, something about the sight made me smile without even meaning to. He said good morning while stretching and rubbing the back of his neck. I asked if he wanted some breakfast and told him I was making scrambled eggs. He nodded gratefully, and we fell into a quiet rhythm together. I prepared the food while he sat nearby at the counter, watching me in that particular way that made me feel both nervous and curious at the same time. There was something special about the stillness of that moment. The ordinary sound of the spatula scraping against the pan, the way the early morning sunlight caught the lighter strands in his hair and made them look almost golden. When I handed him his plate, his fingers brushed against mine briefly. It was only for a second, but it was enough to send an unexpected jolt through my entire body. I tried not to let it show on my face. While we ate, he observed that I always seemed so calm and peaceful. I laughed lightly and asked if that was his polite way of calling me boring. He said no immediately, almost urgently. He explained he simply meant it was comforting to be around me. He said I made the house feel safe, like a refuge from the rest of the world. It was such an honest, open compliment, and it affected me more deeply than I wanted to admit. I had spent so many years making everyone else comfortable and ensuring everyone else felt secure and taken care of. But I couldn't remember the last time someone had actually acknowledged that effort, or seen me as anything more than just a provider of food and a clean house. After breakfast, we worked together in the garden. The morning was already growing warm and humid. I showed him how to properly remove dead flowers from the rose bushes and how to identify which plants needed more water and attention. He asked thoughtful, intelligent questions and seemed genuinely interested in learning. At one point, our shoulders brushed together accidentally, as we both reached for the same wilted flower at the same time. It was completely accidental and meaningless, but I felt the contact like electricity running through my body. He said something suddenly that made me pause. He said I seemed different when I was at home, more relaxed than when other people were watching me. I stopped what I was doing, still holding my gardening scissors in the air. I asked him what he meant by that. He explained that I seemed more like my true self when I thought no one was paying attention, like I could finally breathe properly and be myself. His perception unsettled me deeply. How had this young man, who was barely more than a stranger to me, managed to see something I had hidden even from myself for all these years? We spent the afternoon organizing my neglected library together, pulling dusty books from shelves and creating piles to donate and piles to keep. He discovered my collection of poetry books, many of them from my college years. The pages were yellowed with age, and the margins were filled with notes I had written as a younger woman. He said I had written in all of them, and that the notes were very personal. I felt slightly embarrassed and said I was young back then, and thought I understood everything about life. He replied that I understood more than I was giving myself credit for. Then he read one of my old margin comments out loud. It said we spend our entire lives preparing for a future that never quite arrives. He asked how old I was when I wrote that, maybe 20. And he said it was still true today. Something in his voice made me turn toward him completely. He was looking at me with such intensity and such genuine interest that I felt exposed in a way I hadn't experienced in decades. It was like he could see straight through all the walls I had built around myself. That evening, we prepared dinner together, moving around the kitchen in perfect synchronized rhythm. I chopped vegetables while he prepared a simple pasta sauce, and we talked about everything and nothing at the same time. His dreams of traveling the world someday. His fear of disappointing his parents with his choices. My own regrets about roads I never took and opportunities I never seized. He asked me if I ever wondered about the life I might have lived if I had made different choices along the way. I answered carefully, saying everyone wonders about that sometimes, but wondering doesn't really accomplish anything. He said maybe that's true, but maybe it also reminds us we still have time to make different choices now, in the present. After dinner, we sat together in my living room with dim lamps casting warm shadows across the walls. I had opened a bottle of wine and poured myself a glass. I offered him one too, despite knowing he was underage. He accepted it with a slight smile that suggested he appreciated being treated like an adult, instead of a child. We talked late into the evening, our conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic with surprising ease. Somewhere around midnight, he said something funny that made me laugh genuinely and freely. It was the kind of uninhibited laughter I had almost forgotten I was capable of producing. He said softly, with bright eyes, that there it was. That was the real smile he had been talking about before. The way he looked at me in that moment made everything else in the room seem to disappear and fade away. I felt truly seen, perhaps for the first time in years. I said I should probably get to bed, though I didn't actually move to stand up. He replied that I didn't have to go unless I wanted to. The truth was, I didn't want to. That was the terrifying reality. I wanted to stay in that moment forever. I wanted to hold on to this feeling of being alive and mattering to someone. Even if that someone was impossibly young and would be leaving in just 2 more days. I stood up anyway, because that's what responsible people did. That's what I had always done my entire life. I said goodnight to Lucas gently. He stood up as well, moving closer to me. For one breathless moment, I thought he might hug me or cross some invisible line that neither of us had acknowledged out loud. But instead, he simply reached out and took my hand, holding it briefly in both of his. He said goodnight to me, using my first name Catherine, then thanked me for the day and for everything. I went upstairs to my bedroom but couldn't sleep at all. I lay in the darkness with my mind racing, and my heart beating far too quickly for someone my age. I kept replaying moments from the evening in my head over and over. I kept feeling the warmth of his hand holding mine. I told myself this was dangerous. This was inappropriate. This was everything I should not be feeling. But I felt it anyway, and there was nothing I could do to make it go away. The next morning arrived overcast and grey, matching my confused emotional state perfectly. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table again, staring out at the garden, and trying to organize my chaotic thoughts into something that made sense. When Lucas appeared, he looked like he hadn't slept well either. There were faint dark shadows beneath his eyes, and his usual easy smile seemed forced and unnatural. I asked if he was all right. He admitted he wasn't certain, and asked if he could ask me something. I told him of course he could. He asked directly if yesterday when we were talking, did I feel it too? Or was he imagining something that wasn't really there? The directness and honesty of his question took my breath away. I could have denied it. I could have protected us both by pretending I didn't know what he meant. But I found myself completely incapable of lying to him. I said quietly that yes, I felt it. But that didn't mean anything should happen between us. He asked simply why not. I struggled to find the right words. I said because of 1,000 different reasons. Our ages, his mother being my best friend, what people would think, the fact that he was leaving the next day, and this would all become some strange memory we would both try to forget. He said firmly that he didn't want to forget any of it. And he didn't think I wanted to forget it either. He was right, of course. That was perhaps the most frightening part of all. We spent that morning in careful silence, both of us aware that something fundamental had shifted and changed between us. We did ordinary tasks like washing dishes and folding laundry, but every accidental touch felt charged with meaning and significance. Every glance lasted just slightly too long. That afternoon, we found ourselves back in the living room watching a quiet foreign film he had selected. It was slow and contemplative, filled with long silences and meaningful glances between characters who couldn't quite put their feelings into words. Somewhere in the middle of the movie, he reached over and placed his hand over mine where it was resting on the couch between us. This time, I didn't pull away. I simply let it happen. I let our fingers slowly intertwine together. I let myself feel the warmth of his skin against mine. We sat that way for the rest of the film, saying absolutely nothing. The flickering light from the television screen played across our faces. I could feel his pulse through his fingertips, steady and strong and impossibly young. My own hand trembled slightly, but I didn't withdraw it. When the movie credits began to roll, he turned toward me with his eyes searching mine intensely, making my heart race. He asked softly if he could tell me something. I nodded, unable to speak or find any words. He said I was the first person in years who had made him feel genuinely understood, who hadn't treated him like a child or dismissed his thoughts as naive and unimportant. He said I listened as though what he said actually mattered and was valuable. I swallowed hard. I told him what he said did matter. He mattered. He said he knew that, but I was the only person who made him believe it was true. There was something achingly vulnerable in his voice, something that reached into the forgotten, dusty corners of my heart. Without consciously deciding to do it, I reached up and brushed a strand of hair away from his forehead. My fingers barely grazed his skin. He leaned forward slightly, just enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath on my face, just enough that I had to close my eyes for a moment to steady myself. But then reality came crashing back, and I stood up abruptly. I said I needed to start preparing dinner, and my voice sounded unsteady even to my own ears. He didn't try to stop me or protest. He simply watched as I practically fled to the kitchen, his expression unreadable and impossible to interpret. In the kitchen, I gripped the edge of the counter tightly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears like drums beating. This could not happen. He was leaving the next day. Margaret would return to pick him up. Life would go back to its normal, predictable rhythm and routine. And yet something inside me had changed forever and completely, like a door opening onto a room I had forgotten even existed. That evening after we finished our meal, Lucas insisted on washing all the dishes. I stood beside him, drying each plate and glass as he handed it to me. Our movements were slow and deliberate, charged with unspoken tension that hung in the air between us. When we finished, he turned to face me directly with water still dripping from his hands. He thanked me. I asked him what for. He said for everything, for treating him like a real person rather than just someone's kid, for making him feel seen and valued. I couldn't find the right words to respond. So instead, I reached up and touched his cheek very gently. Just once, just lightly, with my fingertips barely making contact with his skin. And in that suspended, frozen moment, I understood completely that this wasn't truly about age or attraction or even physical desire. It was about connection between two human beings. It was about recognition, and being genuinely seen and valued by another person in a way I hadn't experienced in more years than I cared to count. It was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. That night, I couldn't even attempt to sleep. I sat alone in the darkened living room after Lucas had gone upstairs to bed. The house was wrapped in the particular kind of stillness that exists only in the deepest hours of night. I pulled a blanket around my shoulders and sat curled on the couch, staring at nothing in particular. My thoughts moved like slow water, too heavy to resist but impossible to direct or control. I kept returning to everything that had happened over these few short days. The quiet conversations we had shared, the meaningful glances, the words that kept echoing in my mind long after they were spoken. I hadn't expected any of it, and I certainly hadn't expected it to feel so genuine and significant. I had been merely existing quietly for years now. My divorce, though friendly and amicable, had left me feeling hollow and empty inside. My children had grown up and moved away to build their own lives. I had constructed a daily routine that was safe, structured, and completely controllable. I had even managed to convince myself that this was enough, that this was all I could reasonably expect at my stage of life. Until now, it was just past 2 a.m. when I heard footsteps descending the stairs. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could feel his presence, soft and uncertain, in the doorway behind me. He said quietly that he couldn't sleep. I said neither could I. He moved into the room and sat beside me on the couch, being careful to maintain some distance between us at first. His voice was low and almost hesitant when he spoke. He said he was leaving the next day. I said I knew. There was a long, heavy silence that stretched between us. He said finally that he didn't want this to become something we both pretended never happened. He didn't want to leave and have us both act like these days together meant absolutely nothing. Turned to look at him properly and directly. I said we hadn't done anything wrong. He replied that we had done everything. Even if we hadn't touched beyond holding hands. Even if we hadn't crossed any obvious line or boundary. He asked me if I felt this too, didn't I? I looked away from his intense gaze, but that didn't make his words any less true or real. I whispered that yes, I did feel it, but I said that acknowledging it didn't mean we should act on it. He said carefully that he wasn't asking for a future, together or a relationship. He wasn't confused about reality and what was possible. He simply needed to know he wasn't alone in feeling this way. That it wasn't just his imagination playing tricks on him. I admitted to him that no, he wasn't alone. He wasn't imagining any of it. Silence settled over us again, but this time it felt more comfortable and peaceful. Outside, the wind had picked up, causing tree branches to scrape gently against the window. It was a soft reminder that time kept passing regardless of what we wished or wanted. He reached out his hand, and this time I didn't hesitate at all. I allowed his hand to find mine, and allowed our fingers to interlace naturally, as though we had done this 1,000 times before in another life.